At my cousin's graduation party, I watched her accept congratulations for her MBA while family members whispered about my dead-end job at Walmart. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled, checked my phone, and waited for the call I knew was coming. When it rang, I stepped to the center of the room and put it on speaker. Ms. Rodriguez, the contracts are finalized. All 15 locations are officially yours. Congratulations on becoming the youngest multi-store owner in the tri-state area. The room went silent. My cousin's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, and I finally said what I'd been holding back for 3 years. Thanks, Jennifer. I'll be there Monday to sign the final paperwork for stores 16 through 20. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maria Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a middle-class family in Austin, Texas, where success was measured by your job title and the size of your salary. My parents, Carlos and Elena Rodriguez, had built their lives around traditional markers of achievement. Dad worked his way up to senior manager at a tech company. Mom was a high school principal. They lived for parent-teacher conferences where they could brag about their children's accomplishments. My older brother Miguel became a software engineer at Google. My younger sister Sophia was finishing her residency as a pediatrician. And then there was me, the family question mark, the one who chose a different path entirely. It started innocently enough. After high school, I enrolled at University of Texas with a business major, just like my parents wanted. But halfway through my sophomore year, something shifted. I was working part-time at a local Walmart to pay for textbooks and gas, and I started noticing things. The way certain products flew off the shelves while others gathered dust. How customer traffic patterns changed throughout the day. The disconnect between what corporate thought customers wanted and what they actually bought. I became fascinated by retail psychology, by the intricate dance between consumer behavior and business strategy. My business professors were teaching theory from textbooks, but I was learning reality from the sales floor. I started taking extra shifts, not because I needed the money, but because I was genuinely curious about how the machine worked. That's when I made my first strike against family expectations. I changed my major to supply chain management with a focus on retail operations. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't prestigious. But it felt right in a way that traditional business courses never had. My parents were confused but supportive. It's still business, Mom reasoned. She'll figure it out. Dad nodded along, though I could see the concern in his eyes. In their world, you went to college to move up and away from places like Walmart, not to understand them better. But the real controversy came during my senior year. I was offered a management trainee position at a prestigious consulting firm in Dallas. Great salary, impressive title, the kind of job my parents could brag about at dinner parties. I turned it down. Instead, I accepted a full-time position as an assistant manager at the same Walmart where I'd been working part-time. The family dinner where I announced this decision was legendary for all the wrong reasons. My cousin Jessica, who was finishing her own business degree at SMU, literally spit out her wine. "You're choosing Walmart over consulting? Maria, that's career suicide." Jessica had always been the golden child in our extended family. 2 years older than me, she'd sailed through private school, landed internships at Fortune 500 companies, and had a habit of treating family gatherings like networking events. She spoke in business jargon and name-dropped her professors like they were celebrities. "It's not career suicide," I replied calmly. "It's career strategy. I'm learning the industry from the ground up." My Uncle Robert, Jessica's father, leaned forward with that condescending smile he'd perfected over years of corporate middle management. "Sweetheart, ground up is one thing. But you don't want to get stuck at ground level forever." "I'm not stuck," I said. "I'm building something." That got a few chuckles around the table. My Aunt Patricia, Robert's wife, patted my hand like I was a child who'd just announced I wanted to be a princess. "Building what, honey? A life in retail?" The thing is, I actually was building something. But I couldn't explain it to them because I barely understood it myself yet. All I knew was that every day at Walmart taught me something new about business, but no classroom ever could. I learned how to manage inventory turnover, how to optimize staff scheduling, how to read sales data like a roadmap to customer behavior. More importantly, I learned about the gaps in the market. I noticed that our store consistently ran out of certain products that weren't being reordered quickly enough. I saw how customer complaints often pointed to the same recurring issues. I watched small businesses struggle to get shelf space for products that customers actually wanted. While my family saw a dead-end job, I saw a masterclass in retail operations. While they worried about my career trajectory, I was quietly building a network of suppliers, manufacturers, and industry contacts. While they attended cocktail parties and complained about their corporate jobs, I was on the floor every day, learning what actually made customers buy. But none of that mattered to my family. In their eyes, I was the one who'd lost her way. Jessica became the family spokesperson for my situation. At every gathering, she'd find a way to bring up my career choices, always with that mix of concern and superiority that made my teeth clench. "I worry about Maria," she'd say to our aunts, loud enough for me to hear. "She's so smart, but she's wasting her potential. How long can you really stay in retail management?" The worst part was that my parents were starting to echo her concerns. Dad would forward me job postings from his company. Mom would mention that her friend's daughter had moved up from retail to corporate. They meant well, but every conversation felt like a gentle intervention designed to steer me back to the right path. 3 years into my position at Walmart, I had worked my way up to store manager. I was running a $50 million operation with 300 employees. I had turned around 2 underperforming locations and consistently exceeded sales targets. But when I shared these achievements with my family, they heard, "Still working at Walmart." The breaking point came at my cousin's engagement party last spring. Jessica had gotten engaged to Brad, an investment banker from Dallas, and the party was a celebration of everything our family valued: prestigious career, high salary, impressive social connections. I arrived straight from work, still in my manager's polo shirt and khakis, while everyone else was dressed like they were attending a country club fundraiser. "Maria!" Jessica's voice cut through the crowd as she spotted me near the appetizer table. "I'm so glad you could make it. How's the job?" The way she said job made it sound like I was collecting unemployment. I smiled and congratulated her on the engagement, but she wasn't finished. "You know," she continued, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, "Brad was just telling me about some openings at his firm. Corporate positions. Maybe it's time to think about moving up?" Moving up. As if managing a multi-million-dollar operation wasn't up enough. As if the skills I'd developed, the knowledge I'd gained, the network I'd built somehow didn't count because it happened inside a Walmart instead of a glass tower downtown. I excused myself and found a quiet corner of the garden where I could collect my thoughts. That's when I overheard it. Jessica was talking to our cousin David, and their voices carried across the patio. "I feel bad for her," Jessica was saying. "She's stuck in this retail bubble and doesn't even realize it. Working at Walmart forever? Can you imagine?" David, who worked in marketing for a startup, nodded sympathetically. "It's like she's afraid to take risks. Some people just settle, you know?" Afraid to take risks. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud. They had no idea what I was actually doing with my evenings and weekends. They didn't know about the business plan I'd been developing for 2 years. They had never heard of the investors I'd been quietly meeting with, or the market research I'd been conducting, or the locations I'd been scouting. They thought I was settling. I was actually preparing for the biggest risk of my life. But I couldn't tell them that. Not yet. Because the difference between a dreamer and an entrepreneur isn't the size of your vision. It's the strength of your execution. And I was still 6 months away from executing the plan that would change everything. So I walked back to the party, smiled through the rest of the evening, and filed away every condescending comment and pitying look. I was building something they couldn't see yet, something that would prove that sometimes the best way to move up is to first understand what ground level really looks like. Little did they know, I was about to show them exactly what working at Walmart forever had actually taught me about building an empire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What my family didn't know was that my dead-end job at Walmart had become the foundation of something much bigger. Every night after my shift, I would drive to a small office space I'd rented in a strip mall across town. It wasn't much, just 400 square feet with fluorescent lighting and a coffee maker that barely worked, but it was mine. This was where I was building Rodriguez Retail Solutions, my consulting firm that would eventually become the launching pad for my retail empire. The idea had started forming during my second year as a store manager. I kept noticing patterns that corporate wasn't seeing. Small businesses would come to me, desperate to get their products on our shelves, but they had no idea how to navigate the complex world of retail partnerships. Meanwhile, I was watching established suppliers make rookie mistakes in inventory management and customer targeting that were costing them thousands. I realized there was a massive gap in the market. Small to medium-sized businesses needed someone who understood both sides of the equation. Someone who knew how retail actually worked from the inside, not just the theory they taught in business school. That's when I decided to start consulting on the side. My first client was a local bakery called Sweet Dreams, owned by an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen. She had been trying for months to get her specialty cookies into local grocery stores, but every meeting ended in rejection. When she approached me at the store one day, asking for advice, I offered to help her for free just to see if my theories would work in practice. I spent 3 evenings reviewing her product packaging, pricing strategy, and pitch materials. The problems were obvious to me, but invisible to her. Her margins were too thin, her packaging looked homemade, and she was targeting the wrong demographic entirely. Within 2 weeks, I had helped her redesign her approach, and within a month, she had contracts with 3 local grocery chains. Word spread quickly in the small business community. Mrs. Chen referred me to her friend who owned a specialty spice company. The spice company owner mentioned me to someone in his networking group. Before I knew it, I was juggling a dozen consulting clients while still working full-time at Walmart. But consulting was just the beginning. As I worked with more businesses, I started to see bigger opportunities. Many of my clients were struggling with the same fundamental problem. They couldn't afford the minimum orders required by major suppliers, and they couldn't get shelf space in larger stores because they didn't have the volume or the connections. That's when I had my breakthrough moment. What if I could create a retail model that specifically served these overlooked businesses? What if I could build a chain of stores that functioned as a curated marketplace for local and regional products that couldn't compete with the big boys? I started researching similar concepts and found that while there were some farmers markets and craft fairs serving this niche, there wasn't a professional retail chain focused specifically on being the bridge between small producers and consumers who wanted unique, locally sourced products. The more I researched, the more excited I became. This wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a way to solve a real problem in the market while building something that could genuinely help communities. I named my concept Local Roots Market, a chain of stores that would feature products from small, local businesses, with each location tailored to its specific community. The idea was to create a shopping experience that felt personal and authentic, while maintaining the professionalism and convenience that modern consumers expected. But turning an idea into reality required more than just enthusiasm. I needed capital, and I needed credibility. That's where my Walmart experience became invaluable in ways my family never understood. Working in retail management had taught me how to analyze market data, optimize supply chains, and manage complex operations. I knew how to read financial statements, negotiate with suppliers, and handle everything from staffing challenges to inventory management. More importantly, I had built relationships with dozens of local suppliers and had a deep understanding of consumer behavior in my region. I spent 6 months developing a comprehensive business plan. I analyzed demographic data for potential locations, created detailed financial projections, and developed operational procedures based on everything I'd learned from managing a large retail operation. I even reached out to some of my consulting clients to gauge interest in being featured suppliers. Hoaxes. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Mrs. Chen offered to be an anchor tenant in my first location. The spice company owner introduced me to 3 other small food producers who were interested in partnering with me. A local artist collective asked if I would consider featuring handmade goods alongside food products. But I still needed investors. This is where things got tricky. I had saved about $50,000 from my consulting work, but that was nowhere near enough to launch a retail chain. I needed at least $500,000 to get started, and ideally closer to $1 million to do it right. I started attending networking events and pitching to local investors. The responses were mixed. Some were intrigued by the concept, but many were skeptical about my background. "You're a Walmart manager," one investor told me bluntly. "How do we know you can handle something this complex?" The irony was painful. My experience at Walmart was exactly why I could handle something this complex. But they couldn't see past the stigma attached to retail work. In their minds, working at Walmart meant I was somehow less qualified than someone with an MBA who had never actually run a retail operation. I started to realize that I was fighting the same battle on two fronts. At home, my family saw my career as a limitation. In the business world, potential investors saw it the same way. Everyone was so focused on where I worked that they couldn't see what I had actually learned. That's when I met Jonathan Hayes, a semi-retired entrepreneur who had built and sold several successful businesses. He was different from the other investors I'd pitched to. Instead of asking about my educational background or previous business experience, he asked detailed questions about my operational plans and market analysis. "You know," he said after I finished my presentation, "I've seen a lot of business plans from MBA graduates who understand theory but have never actually run anything. You're the first person I've met who actually knows how retail works from the inside out." Jonathan became my first major investor, putting in $200,000 for a 20% stake in the company. But more importantly, he introduced me to his network of other investors who were interested in practical, scalable business models rather than flashy tech startups. Within 3 months, I had raised $800,000 from a group of 5 investors. We had enough capital to launch 3 locations and operate for at least 18 months while building our customer base. The next 6 months were a blur of activity. I continued working at Walmart during the day while spending evenings and weekends finding locations, negotiating leases, and setting up supply relationships. I hired my first employees, a mix of retail veterans and young college graduates who were excited about the concept. My first location was in a renovated grocery store in a trendy neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown Austin. The space was perfect, large enough to accommodate a diverse product mix, with good parking and foot traffic from nearby restaurants and shops. I designed the store layout myself, drawing on everything I'd learned about traffic patterns and product placement. Instead of traditional grocery store aisles, I created themed sections that told stories about local producers. The bakery section featured Mrs. Chen's cookies alongside products from 4 other local bakers. The spice section included detailed information about the farms where the herbs were grown. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in late September. I had spent weeks promoting the event, working with local food bloggers and community organizations to spread the word. 3 of my consulting clients had agreed to do product demonstrations, and I had arranged for a local band to perform in the parking lot. But throughout all of this preparation, I hadn't told my family what I was doing. As far as they knew, I was still just the store manager at Walmart, who did a little consulting on the side. They had no idea that I had been building something that would fundamentally change how they saw my career choices. The Thursday before the grand opening, I was putting the finishing touches on the store displays when my phone rang. It was Jessica, and she sounded unusually cheerful. "Maria! I hope you don't mind, but I was telling Mom about this cute little farmer's market I went to in Dallas, and she mentioned that you always talk about small businesses. I thought maybe you'd want to check it out sometime. You know, maybe it would give you some ideas for whatever it is you're doing." I almost laughed. She had no idea that she was describing exactly what I had spent 2 years building. "That sounds interesting," I said carefully. "Send me the details." "I will. And actually, I have some news. Brad and I are having a little celebration tomorrow night for his promotion. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. You should come. I know you're probably working, but maybe you could ask for the night off?" Ask for the night off. The assumption that I was still just an employee who needed permission to attend family events was almost insulting. But I kept my voice neutral. "I'll see what I can do." "Great. Oh, and Maria, I've been thinking about what we talked about at my engagement party. About moving up in your career. I actually have some connections at a few companies in Austin. Maybe it's time to seriously consider your options. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of my almost finished store and smiled. Tomorrow night, while Jessica was celebrating Brad's promotion, I would be preparing for the grand opening of my first location. And the weekend after that, I would be opening my second store across town. The Panis Tenons. But I still wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. I wanted to prove that the concept worked before I made any announcements. I wanted to have real sales numbers and concrete evidence that I had built something sustainable. More than that, I wanted to savor the moment when I finally revealed what I had been working on. Because I knew that when I did, it would change everything. Not just how my family saw me, but how they understood what success actually looked like. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to my store for one final walkthrough before the grand opening. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. Everything was ready. The shelves were stocked, the displays were perfect, and the staff was trained and enthusiastic. In less than 24 hours, I would officially become a retail entrepreneur. But first, I had to get through one more family gathering, where everyone would see me as the same old Maria who was stuck at Walmart. If they only knew what was coming. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I stood outside local Roots Market at 6 a.m., watching my team arrive for our grand opening. Sarah Martinez, my assistant manager who I'd poached from a competing grocery chain, pulled up first, followed by Tommy Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew who'd insisted on working for us after seeing what we'd done for his aunt's business. The store looked magnificent in the early morning light. The hand-painted sign I'd commissioned from a local artist gleamed against the brick facade. Through the large windows you could see the warm lighting and carefully arranged displays that had taken months to perfect. This wasn't just another retail location, it was the physical manifestation of everything I'd been working toward. By 8 a.m., an hour before our official opening, there was already a line forming outside. Local food bloggers had picked up our story, and the neighborhood Facebook groups had been buzzing about the new concept store all week. I watched through the window as families with strollers chatted with young professionals holding coffee cups, all waiting to see what we'd created. Mrs. Chen arrived at 8:30 with 3 trays of her signature cookies for the opening day sampling. "Maria," she said, giving me a hug that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, "I can't believe this is really happening. When I first met you at Walmart, I never imagined that the girl in the polo shirt would build something like this." I finished with a grin. She laughed. "I was going to say I never imagined anyone would care enough about small businesses to create something this beautiful for us." At exactly 9 a.m., I unlocked the front doors and welcomed our first customers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People didn't just shop, they explored. They read the story cards I'd written for each local producer. They asked questions about the farms where their vegetables were grown. They sampled products and discovered brands they'd never heard of. By noon, we had sold out of Mrs. Chen's cookies entirely and were running low on several other products. Sarah was frantically calling suppliers to arrange emergency restocks, while Tommy worked the crowd like a natural salesman, explaining the stories behind every product. But the real validation came from the customers themselves. I overheard conversation after conversation about how refreshing it was to find authentic products, how much they appreciated learning about local producers, how the store felt different from typical grocery shopping. A woman named Linda Thompson, who I later learned was a food critic for the Austin Chronicle, spent nearly an hour in the store, taking notes and photos. Before she left, she approached me at the customer service counter. "Are you the owner?" she asked. I nodded, suddenly nervous about what she might say. "This is exactly what Austin has been missing," she said. "I've been covering food and retail for 15 years, and this is the most thoughtful curation I've seen. How did you know to put together this particular mix of suppliers?" I started to explain my background in retail management and my consulting work with local businesses, but I didn't mention Walmart. Old habits die hard, and I still wasn't sure how people would react to learning that my expertise came from working at a store they might consider beneath this concept. The day flew by in a blur of sales, conversations, and problem-solving. By closing time at 8 p.m., we had exceeded our projected opening day sales by 40%. More importantly, we had collected contact information from over 200 customers who wanted to be notified about new products and special events. As my team cleaned up and I counted the register, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Hope your day at work wasn't too boring. The party tonight is going to be amazing. Sure you can't make it?" I stared at that text for a long moment. While Jessica was getting ready for a party to celebrate someone else's corporate promotion, I had just successfully launched my first business. While she was probably picking out jewelry to match her outfit, I was looking at sales figures that proved my concept could work. But I still wasn't ready to share the news. One successful day didn't make a sustainable business, and I had learned from my consulting work that it was better to underpromise and overdeliver than to celebrate too early. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments and improvements. Customer feedback helped us refine our product mix and store layout. We added a small cafe area when customers kept asking if they could eat their purchases on site. We expanded our local produce section after it became clear that people were driving from across the city, specifically for vegetables they couldn't find elsewhere. More importantly, our success was attracting attention from other local producers who wanted to partner with us. I was getting calls from small-scale manufacturers, artisan food producers, and even some national brands that specialized in organic or sustainable products. 3 weeks after our opening, Jonathan Hayes visited the store for the first time since we'd launched. He walked through every aisle, talked to customers, and spent an hour reviewing our sales data in my tiny back office. "Maria," he said finally, "I've been investing in retail concepts for 20 years, and I've never seen a new store generate this kind of customer loyalty this quickly. People aren't just shopping here, they're emotionally invested in what you're doing." That's when he made the proposal that would change everything. "I want to fund rapid expansion," he said. "Not just 1 or 2 more stores. I'm talking about a real regional rollout. I think we could have 15 locations within 2 years if we move aggressively." I almost couldn't process what he was saying. 15 locations would make us a legitimate retail chain, not just a successful local business. It would require taking on significantly more investment and scaling our operations in ways I had dreamed about but never thought would happen so quickly. "What kind of numbers are we talking about?" I asked. "I'm prepared to invest another $2 million personally, and I have partners who would match that." "We're looking at $4 million total for expansion, which should be enough to open 12 to 15 stores and operate them until they reach profitability." The offer was incredible, but it also meant making a decision that would fundamentally change my life. Up until that moment, local routes market had been something I was building on the side while keeping my day job as a safety net. Expanding to 15 locations would require leaving Walmart and committing to entrepreneurship full-time. "I need some time to think about it," I told Jonathan, though in my heart I already knew what my answer would be. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and tried to wrap my head around what was happening. 6 months ago, my biggest concern had been whether I could raise enough money to open 1 store. Now I was being offered the capital to build a regional retail chain. I called my mentor, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been my supply chain management professor in college and had become a trusted advisor over the years. She was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I was building. "Patricia," I said, "I need to talk through a major decision." I explained Jonathan's offer and my own conflicted feelings about scaling so quickly. "Maria," she said after I finished, "let me ask you something. When you were developing this concept, what was your 5-year vision?" I thought back to the business plan I'd written 18 months earlier. Regional presence with at least 12 locations across Texas, possibly expanding into Oklahoma and Louisiana. And how long did you think it would take to get there? I projected 5 to 7 years, assuming everything went perfectly. So what you're telling me is that someone is offering to compress your timeline by 60% and remove most of the financial risk. What exactly are you conflicted about? When she put it that way, my hesitation seemed irrational. But I think I was scared of success happening too quickly. There's something terrifying about achieving your dreams faster than you thought possible. "I think I'm worried about losing control," I admitted. "Right now, I understand every aspect of the business. If we scale this quickly, there will be so many moving parts that I won't be able to manage everything personally." "That's not a bug, Maria, that's a feature. The whole point of building a business is to create something that can operate without you micromanaging every detail. You've proven the concept works. Now you have to trust your systems and your team to scale it. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening working through the financial projections and operational requirements for a 15-store chain. The numbers were intimidating, but achievable. We would need to hire regional managers, establish centralized purchasing agreements, and develop standardized training programs. But all of that was exciting rather than daunting. By midnight, I had made my decision. I would accept Jonathan's offer and commit to full-time entrepreneurship. The next morning, I called in sick to Walmart for the first time in 3 years. I wasn't actually sick, but I needed a full day to prepare for the conversation I was about to have with my district manager. I had been planning to give 2 weeks' notice eventually, but Jonathan's offer had accelerated my timeline. If we were going to open multiple locations simultaneously, I needed to be working on expansion full-time starting immediately. Walking into the Walmart where I'd worked for 5 years felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same, but I felt like a completely different person. The fluorescent lights that had once felt oppressive now seemed quaint. The endless aisles that had once felt overwhelming now seemed manageable compared to coordinating multiple store locations. My district manager, Kevin Thompson, was surprised by my resignation, but surprisingly supportive. "I've been wondering when this day would come," he said. "You've been operating at a level that's bigger than what we can offer you here. I don't know what you're moving on to, but I'm sure it's going to be impressive." I thanked him for the opportunity and for everything I'd learned, and I meant it. Without my experience at Walmart, I never would have had the knowledge or confidence to build Local Roots Market. As I cleaned out my office and said goodbye to my team, I felt a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. This place had been my business school, my laboratory, and my launching pad. Now it was time to use everything I'd learned to build something bigger than I'd ever imagined possible. That afternoon, I called Jonathan and accepted his offer. We scheduled a meeting for the following week to finalize the investment terms and begin planning our expansion strategy. But I still hadn't told my family anything about what was happening. As far as they knew, I was still just the Walmart manager who did a little consulting on the side. They had no idea that I was about to become the CEO of a rapidly expanding retail chain. I wasn't ready to share the news yet, because I wanted to have concrete proof of our expansion before making any announcements. But more than that, I was starting to realize that their approval wasn't what I was after anymore. For years, I had felt like I was constantly defending my choices to people who didn't understand what I was trying to build. Now I was building something so successful that their opinions were becoming irrelevant. The validation I needed wasn't going to come from family dinners or graduation parties. It was going to come from customers who loved shopping at my stores, from employees who were proud to work for my company, and from the small business owners whose lives were being changed by the platform I was creating for them. But I have to admit, there was still a part of me that was looking forward to the moment when I could finally show my family what I had really been building all these years. 2 months after accepting Jonathan's investment offer, I was running a company that bore little resemblance to the single store I'd opened just 12 weeks earlier. Local Roots Market had evolved from a promising startup into a fast-growing retail operation, with 3 locations already open and 2 more in development. Our second store in South Austin had opened to lines around the block after a local TV food show featured us in a segment about Austin's most innovative grocery concepts. The third location in Cedar Park had broken our opening day sales record by 30%. But more importantly, each store was developing its own personality while maintaining the core Local Roots identity. The Cedar Park location, for example, had become known for its extensive selection of locally sourced baby and toddler products after our manager, Lisa Hoffman, noticed that young families made up a large portion of our customer base. The South Austin store had developed a thriving prepared foods section when customers kept asking if we could make meals using our specialty ingredients. I was learning that scaling a retail concept wasn't just about replicating what worked. It was about creating a framework flexible enough to adapt to different communities while maintaining brand consistency. It was exactly the kind of complex problem-solving that my years at Walmart had prepared me for, but on a much more creative and personally meaningful level. The growth was exhilarating, but it was also consuming my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was working 14-hour days, splitting my time between existing stores, new location development, supplier relationships, and the endless administrative tasks that come with rapid expansion. I had hired an assistant, Rebecca Park, a recent UT business graduate who was brilliant at operations management, but I was still personally involved in every major decision. My family had started to notice that I was less available for their usual dinners and get-togethers. When my mom called to invite me to Sunday dinner, I found myself making excuses more often than not. "Maria, you're missing everything," she said during one phone call. "Miguel brought the baby last week, and Sophia had news about her residency placement. When was the last time we all sat down together?" I felt a pang of guilt. "I've just been really busy with work stuff, Mom. You know how retail can be during busy seasons." "That's exactly what I'm worried about," she replied. "You're letting that job take over your whole life. There has to be more to living than working at Walmart all the time." If she only knew that I hadn't worked a shift at Walmart in 2 months. If she only knew that my work stuff included negotiating lease agreements for 5 additional store locations and developing wholesale partnerships with regional distributors across 3 states. But I still wasn't ready to tell them. The business was growing so quickly that I wanted to make sure our success was sustainable before making any announcements. There's nothing worse than premature celebration, and I had seen too many small businesses fail after initial promising starts. More than that, I was discovering something unexpected about success. The bigger local roots market became, the less I needed my family's validation. 6 months ago, their approval had felt essential to my sense of self-worth. Now it felt almost irrelevant compared to the satisfaction of building something that was genuinely making a difference in people's lives. But there was one family event I couldn't avoid: Jessica's graduation party. She had finally finished her MBA at SMU, and Uncle Robert was throwing what he called a celebration of academic achievement at their country club. The invitation, which arrived via formal cardstock rather than text message, made it clear that this wasn't just a casual family gathering. It was a showcase event designed to highlight Jessica's accomplishments and launch her into the next phase of her career. I almost didn't go. Saturday afternoon was our busiest time across all locations, and I had a conference call scheduled with potential investors who were interested in funding our expansion into Houston and San Antonio. But my mother made it clear that skipping Jessica's graduation party would be seen as a serious family slight. "Maria, she's your cousin," Mom said when I tried to explain why I might not be able to make it. "She's been working toward this degree for 2 years, and Robert has been planning this party for months. Whatever is going on at work can wait for one evening." So I rearranged my schedule, moved the investor call to Sunday morning, and drove to the country club in my best professional dress, a navy blue sheath that I'd bought for investor meetings, but that would pass for appropriate party attire. The country club was exactly what I expected: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that costs a fortune but tries to look effortless. Jessica had chosen the venue well. It was the perfect backdrop for the image she was trying to project. I arrived fashionably late, hoping to avoid the receiving line and the inevitable awkward conversations about my career. But Jessica spotted me almost immediately and made a beeline across the room. "Maria, I'm so glad you made it." She hugged me with the kind of enthusiasm that felt slightly performative. "You look great. Is that a new dress?" "Thanks, and congratulations on finishing your MBA," I replied, handing her the gift I'd brought, a leather business portfolio that had cost more than she probably imagined I could afford. "Oh, you didn't have to," but she was already examining the portfolio with obvious approval. "This is gorgeous. Where did you find it?" "A local artisan leather worker," I said. "One of my consulting clients, actually." Jessica's expression shifted slightly. I could see her trying to reconcile the quality of the gift with her assumptions about my financial situation. "Right, your consulting thing. That's so nice that you have hobbies outside of work." "Hobbies." She called my business ventures hobbies. Before I could respond, Uncle Robert appeared with 2 glasses of champagne. "Maria, good to see you could take time off from the store. Jessica was just telling us about the offer she received from Patterson & Associates. Senior associate position, starting at $95,000 plus bonuses. Not bad for a new graduate, right?" Patterson & Associates was a well-known consulting firm in Dallas. It was exactly the kind of prestigious position that would impress everyone at this party. And $95,000 was indeed a substantial starting salary for someone fresh out of business school. That's impressive, I said, and I meant it. Jessica had worked hard for her degree, and landing a position at a top firm was a genuine achievement. But I couldn't help doing the math in my head. Local Roots Market had generated $180,000 in revenue the previous month across our 3 locations. After expenses, we were netting about $32,000 monthly, which annualized to nearly $400,000 in profit. And that was with only 3 stores operational. She's going to be working with Fortune 500 clients right from the start, Robert continued. Real strategic work, not just operational stuff. Strategic work versus operational stuff. The implication was clear. Jessica would be doing important thinking while I was stuck doing mundane implementation. I smiled politely and excused myself to get some food from the buffet. But as I walked away, I heard Robert continue his conversation with someone else. It's such a relief to see one of the kids really make something of themselves. You know, we were worried about Maria for a while, but Jessica has always had her head on straight. Standing at the seafood station, pretending to be interested in the arrangement of shrimp cocktail, I felt a familiar mix of frustration and amusement. Here was my uncle, celebrating his daughter's entry-level consulting position, while dismissing my retail chain as somehow less valuable because it involved, quote, operational stuff. The irony was that Jessica would probably spend her first year at Patterson & Associates creating PowerPoint presentations about operational improvements for clients who were trying to solve exactly the kinds of problems I dealt with every day. She would be theorizing about supply chain optimization while I was actually optimizing supply chains. She would be developing recommendations for customer experience enhancement while I was actually enhancing customer experiences. But I kept these thoughts to myself and focused on enjoying the evening. The food was excellent, the music was tasteful, and several family members I hadn't seen in months were there to catch up with. My cousin David, who worked in marketing for a tech startup, found me during the cocktail hour. "Hey Maria, how's everything going? Still at Walmart?" "Something like that," I said, which was technically true since I still own stock options that wouldn't vest for another 6 months. "Cool. You know, I've been thinking about what you said at Jessica's engagement party about learning the business from the ground up. I think there's something to that approach, even if it takes longer to see results. If he only knew that my ground-up approach had produced a profitable business in less time than it had taken Jessica to finish her MBA. Sometimes the indirect path is actually faster, I said carefully. The highlight of the evening was Jessica's speech, which she delivered from a small stage near the dance floor. She talked about the importance of education, the value of hard work, and her excitement about beginning her career in strategic consulting. It was a perfectly fine speech, delivered with confidence and sincerity. But as I listened, I realized that everything she was describing, the challenges of building something meaningful, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the excitement of future possibilities, I was already living. While she was preparing to start her career, I was already 3 months into scaling a business that was changing how people thought about local retail. After the speech, as guests mingled and the evening began winding down, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Saturday sales numbers are in. All 3 stores exceeded projections. Cedar Park had best day ever, minus $8,300 in sales. Call me when you can." I stared at that text for a moment, then looked around the room at my family members celebrating Jessica's future potential while remaining completely unaware of my current success. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I walked over to Jessica, who was standing near the bar with a group of her college friends, still glowing from the congratulations she'd been receiving all evening. "Jessica," I said, "I just wanted to say again how proud I am of you. Starting your career at a firm like Patterson & Associates is a big deal." "Thanks, Maria. That really means a lot coming from you." "I was wondering," I continued, "would you be interested in visiting one of my consulting projects sometime? I think you might find it interesting to see how retail strategy actually gets implemented." She looked surprised, but pleased by the invitation. "Oh, that would be fascinating. I'd love to see what kind of work you're doing with small businesses." "Great," I said, pulling out my phone. "Are you free next Saturday afternoon, around 2 p.m.? "Sure. Where should I meet you?" I gave her the address of our Cedar Park location, the store that had just broken our sales record. "Just ask for Maria when you get there. They'll know where to find me." As I drove home that night, I realized that I was finally ready to stop hiding what I had built. Not because I needed my family's approval, but because I was proud of what I had accomplished and excited to share it with people I cared about. Next Saturday, Jessica would discover that her cousin's consulting work was actually a rapidly expanding retail empire. And I was very much looking forward to that conversation. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of perfect Austin weather that makes you believe anything is possible. I had spent the morning at our flagship location, reviewing weekly performance metrics with Sarah and finalizing plans for our upcoming San Antonio expansion. By 1:30 p.m., I was at the Cedar Park store, ostensibly checking inventory, but really just waiting for Jessica to arrive. I hadn't told my team about Jessica's visit or explained why my cousin would be coming by. As far as they knew, it was just another family member stopping by to see what I'd been working on. But I had asked Rebecca to make sure all our promotional materials were prominently displayed and that our community impact board, which showed photos and testimonials from local suppliers, was front and center. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw Jessica's silver BMW pull into our parking lot. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at the storefront with what appeared to be confusion. I watched through the window as she checked her phone, presumably confirming the address I'd given her. When she finally got out of her car, she was dressed in what I recognized as her professional casual uniform, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and the kind of leather handbag that signals competence without being flashy. She had clearly put thought into looking appropriately dressed for whatever she imagined my consulting project would be. I waited until she was almost at the front door before stepping outside to greet her. "Jessica! Perfect timing. I'm so glad you could make it." She looked around the bustling parking lot, taking in the steady stream of customers coming and going, the families with shopping carts, the obvious signs of a thriving business. "This is not what I expected," she said slowly. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know. A small office somewhere? Maybe a meeting room where you work with business owners on their marketing plans?" She gestured toward the store. "This looks like a real grocery store." "It is a real grocery store," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Come on, let me show you around." I held the door open and watched Jessica's face as she stepped inside. Her eyes went wide as she took in the bustling store, customers browsing our curated displays, staff members helping with product recommendations, the obvious energy of a successful retail operation. "Welcome to Local Roots Market," I said. "This is my consulting project." Jessica stopped walking and turned to stare at me. "Your consulting project is a grocery store?" "Not just a grocery store," I replied. "A curated marketplace for local and regional producers. We help small businesses get their products to consumers who want authentic, locally sourced options." I started walking toward the produce section, where our weekend farmers' market-style displays were drawing a crowd. "See this section? Every item comes from farms within 150 miles of Austin. That woman over there sampling the peaches? She's buying from the same farm that supplies 3 of Austin's best restaurants, but she's paying about half what those restaurants charge for dishes made with these ingredients." Jessica followed me, but I could see her struggling to process what she was seeing. "So you run this store?" "I own this store," I corrected, "along with 2 others. And we're opening 2 more next month." The words hung in the air between us. I watched as Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that might have been disbelief. "You own 3 grocery stores?" she asked quietly. "3 so far. We're expanding pretty rapidly." I led her toward the prepared foods section, where Tommy was explaining our partnership with local bakeries to a customer. "The concept is working better than we projected, so we're scaling up." We spent the next hour walking through the store. I introduced Jessica to my team members, showed her our supplier relationship board, and explained how we had developed our unique product mix. I could see her business school training kicking in as she started asking detailed questions about inventory management, profit margins, and customer acquisition costs. "The foot traffic is incredible," she observed, as we paused near the checkout area to watch the steady stream of customers. "How do you drive this kind of volume?" "Mostly word of mouth and social media," I replied. "We focus on creating an experience that people want to share." When customers discover a new local producer or find an ingredient they can't get anywhere else, they tell their friends. But how did you finance this? I mean, opening one store is expensive, but 3 stores plus expansion plans. That has to require serious capital. This was the moment I had been building toward. We've raised about $4 million in investment funding so far. Our investors are interested in regional expansion across Texas and potentially into neighboring states. Jessica's jaw actually dropped. $4 million? Maria, that's serious money. Like Fortune 500 consulting project money. Yeah, I said simply. It is. She was quiet for a long moment, watching customers and clearly trying to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she thought she knew about my career. How long have you been working on this? She finally asked. The planning phase took about 2 years. We opened the first location 4 months ago. 4 months? Her voice rose slightly. You've built all of this in 4 months? Well, I've been building toward it for longer than that. The consulting work I mentioned? That was me learning about the gaps in the market and developing relationships with local suppliers. The Walmart experience taught me how retail operations actually work. This store is what happened when I combined all of that knowledge with sufficient capital to execute properly. We had reached the customer service counter, where our community impact display showed photos of our supplier partners alongside testimonials about how local Roots Market had helped their businesses grow. Jessica studied the display intently. Mrs. Chen's traditional cookies, she read aloud, featured supplier since opening day. Local Roots Market helped us expand from farmers market sales to 3 retail locations, tripling our revenue in 6 months. Mrs. Chen was actually my first consulting client, I explained. She's the one who taught me that there was a real market opportunity here. Jessica turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between respect and amazement. Maria, this is incredible. I mean, genuinely incredible. Why didn't you tell us what you were building? It was a fair question, and one I'd been expecting. Honestly, because I was tired of having to defend my choices. Every family gathering for the past 3 years has included someone explaining why my career wasn't ambitious enough or successful enough. I decided I'd rather prove what I was building than argue about it. She nodded slowly, and I could see her thinking through the implications of what I'd just said. So when everyone was worried about you being stuck at Walmart, I was actually using that experience to build the foundation for this. I gestured around the store. Every day I spent on the floor at Walmart taught me something I've been able to apply here. Customer behavior, inventory optimization, staff management, vendor relationships. I learned all of that from the inside out. We walked toward the front of the store, where Rebecca was coordinating with our weekend staff to handle the busy afternoon rush. I noticed Jessica watching how efficiently our team moved, how well they knew the products, how genuinely engaged they seemed with customers. Your team is really impressive, she said. How did you recruit people who are this knowledgeable about local products? Most of them came from other retail backgrounds, but they're here because they believe in what we're doing. When you're selling products you actually care about to customers who appreciate the curation, it doesn't feel like traditional retail work. As we reached the front doors, Jessica stopped and turned back to look at the store one more time. I need to apologize, she said quietly. For what? For assuming that what you were doing wasn't important. For thinking that working at Walmart meant you weren't ambitious. She paused, and I could see her struggling with how to articulate what she was thinking. For completely underestimating you. You don't need to apologize, I said. You weren't wrong to think that retail management wasn't typically a path to entrepreneurship. I just found a way to make it work for my goals. But I was wrong about a lot more than that, she insisted. I was wrong about what success looks like, about what it means to build something meaningful. This is real impact. You're not just making money. You're creating opportunities for other businesses and giving customers access to products they couldn't find anywhere else. We stood there for a moment, watching the activity inside the store. A family was loading their cart with items for what looked like a dinner party. A young couple was asking Tommy about the story behind one of our specialty condiments. Mrs. Chen was restocking her cookie display while chatting with a regular customer who had become a friend. "Can I ask you something?" Jessica said. "What's your revenue looking like?" I smiled. This was exactly the kind of question I would have expected from someone with her MBA training. "We're projecting about $2.8 million in annual revenue across our current 3 locations. After expenses, we're netting around 14%, which is actually quite strong for retail." She did the math quickly. "So you're personally earning more than I will be at Patterson & Associates?" "Probably," I admitted, "but more importantly, I'm building equity in something that's growing rapidly. If our expansion plans work out the way we're projecting, this could become a very substantial business." "How substantial?" "Our 5-year plan calls for 35 locations across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. If we hit those targets, we're looking at annual revenues in the $40 to $50 million range." Jessica was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than shocked. "Maria, I have to ask, why are you showing me this now? I mean, I'm grateful that you did, but why today?" It was a perceptive question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because I realized that I wasn't hiding this from you to protect the business. I was hiding it to protect myself from having to deal with people who couldn't see what I was building. But that's not fair to either of us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that by keeping this secret, I was assuming you wouldn't be able to appreciate what I've accomplished. And that assumption was based more on my own insecurities than on any evidence about who you actually are." She nodded thoughtfully. "So this was kind of a test?" "Not a test exactly. More like giving you the chance to see what I've really been working on and respond to the reality instead of the assumptions." As we walked toward our cars, Jessica was unusually quiet. Finally, she said, "I need to tell Mom and Dad about this. And Uncle Carlos and Aunt Elena. They need to know what you've built." "Actually," I said, "I'd rather tell them myself. There's another family event coming up where I think it might be appropriate to share the news." "Grandma's 85th birthday party?" "Exactly. It's in 3 weeks, and it'll be the first time the whole family has been together since your graduation party. It seems like the right moment for an announcement." Jessica grinned, the first genuinely enthusiastic expression I'd seen from her all afternoon. "Oh my God, Maria, they're going to be so shocked, in the best possible way." As I drove home that evening, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The secret was out, at least partially. Jessica now knew what I had been building, and her reaction had been everything I could have hoped for: surprise, respect, and genuine excitement about what I had accomplished. But more importantly, I had proven something to myself. I had built something substantial enough that it could speak for itself. I no longer needed to defend my choices or explain my vision. The results were clear, the success was undeniable, and the future was full of possibilities I had only dreamed about 3 years ago. In 3 weeks, at Grandma's birthday party, the rest of my family would discover what Jessica had learned today, and I was very much looking forward to that conversation. The 3 weeks between Jessica's visit and Grandma's birthday party passed in a blur of expansion activities that would have been impossible to imagine just 6 months earlier. While my family was planning a celebration for an 85-year-old woman who had spent her life building a legacy of family and community, I was quietly building a business legacy that was about to surprise them all. Our 4th location in Round Rock had its soft opening on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday we were already adjusting our staffing levels to handle higher than projected customer volume. The store was in a former Whole Foods location that had closed due to lease disputes, and the space was perfect for our concept: high ceilings, excellent natural lighting, and enough square footage to really showcase our expanded product lines. What made Round Rock special wasn't just its size, but what it represented for our business model. This was our first location designed from the ground up as a, quote, flagship store, featuring everything we had learned from our first 3 locations, plus several new concepts we were testing for future expansion. The centerpiece was our local makers workshop, a demonstration kitchen where suppliers could conduct cooking classes, product tastings, and educational sessions about everything from sustainable farming to artisan cheese making. We had partnered with the Austin Community College Culinary Program to offer weekend workshops on topics like farm-to-table cooking and building your own herb garden. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Our first workshop, a bread-making class taught by a local baker named David Martinez, sold out within 2 hours of being announced on social media. By the end of the week, we had a waiting list of over 200 people for upcoming sessions. But the real validation came from our suppliers themselves. Mrs. Chen approached me during the grand opening celebration with tears in her eyes. "Maria," she said, "when I started my bakery 15 years ago, I dreamed of having a space where I could teach people to appreciate traditional cooking techniques. I never imagined someone would create a platform for people like me to share our knowledge along with our products." That conversation crystallized something I had been thinking about but hadn't fully articulated. Local Roots Market wasn't just a retail chain anymore. We were becoming a community hub for food education, supplier development, and consumer engagement. We were creating a new category of retail that didn't exist before. This realization came at exactly the right time, because Jonathan had scheduled a meeting with potential investors who were interested in funding our next phase of expansion. Instead of just opening more stores, we were now talking about creating a scalable model that could transform how people think about grocery shopping in smaller cities across the South. The investor meeting was held at Jonathan's downtown office on the Wednesday before Grandma's party. The conference room was filled with 5 serious-looking men and women in expensive suits, each representing investment funds with portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had spent days preparing for this presentation, but I felt confident in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. I wasn't asking these people to believe in my potential anymore. I was showing them the results of a proven concept and inviting them to participate in scaling something that was already working. Local Roots Market has achieved profitability at all 4 locations within an average of 6 weeks after opening, I began, clicking to a slide that showed our revenue progression. Our average customer spends 23% more per visit than the grocery industry average, and our customer retention rate is 78% higher than comparable retail concepts. But the real breakthrough moment came when I showed them our community impact metrics. We had tracked the business growth of our supplier partners over the past 6 months, and the numbers were remarkable. On average, small producers who partnered with us had seen their revenues increase by 145%. Several had been able to hire additional employees or expand their operations specifically to meet demand generated through our stores. "What you're seeing here isn't just retail success," I explained. "It's economic development. We're creating a platform that helps small businesses scale while giving consumers access to products they can't find elsewhere. Our expansion isn't just about opening more stores. It's about replicating this economic impact in communities across the region." The questions that followed were detailed and sophisticated, but I had answers for all of them. How did we maintain quality control across multiple suppliers? We had developed a rigorous vetting process and provided ongoing support to help partners meet our standards. How did we ensure consistent customer experience across locations? We had created standardized training programs while allowing individual stores to adapt to their local communities. But the question that really excited me came from Margaret Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, a partner at a venture capital firm that specialized in sustainable business models. "Maria, what you've described sounds like it could work in almost any mid-sized city with a strong local food scene. Have you considered franchising this concept?" Franchising. I had thought about it, but only in abstract terms. The idea of licensing our model to independent operators who could adapt it to their local markets was intriguing, but it would require a completely different approach to business development. "We've discussed franchising as a potential growth strategy," I replied carefully, "but we want to make sure we can maintain the quality and community impact that define our brand before we consider that kind of expansion." "That's exactly the right approach," Margaret said. "But I think you should start planning for it now, because this concept could scale nationally if executed properly." The meeting ended with all 5 investors expressing interest in participating in our next funding round. We were looking at raising $8 million, which would allow us to open 12 additional company-owned stores while developing the infrastructure needed to support future franchise operations. As I drove home from that meeting, I found myself thinking about how drastically my life had changed in such a short time. A year ago, my biggest professional concern had been whether I could get approval to rearrange the pharmacy section at Walmart. Now I was discussing plans to build a regional retail chain that could potentially expand nationwide. But more than the business success, I was struck by how different I felt about myself and my place in the world. The woman who had sat silently through Jessica's condescending comments at family gatherings was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect in rooms full of sophisticated investors. That confidence would be crucial for what I was planning to do at Grandma's birthday party. Friday afternoon, I received a call that would add an unexpected element to my weekend announcement. Linda Thompson, the food critic from the Austin Chronicle who had visited our first store on opening day, wanted to interview me for a feature article about innovative retail concepts in Austin. "I've been following local Roots Market's expansion," she said, "and I think our readers would be fascinated by your story. The business model is impressive, but I'm particularly interested in your background and how you developed this concept." We scheduled the interview for Monday morning, but she mentioned that the article would likely run the following weekend. "We're planning to feature you as part of our annual Austin Innovators series," she explained. "It's one of our most widely read sections." This meant that within a week of my family learning about local Roots Market, the story would be public in Austin's most influential food and culture publication. The timing was perfect. It would give credibility to my announcement and provide external validation that this wasn't just a family member bragging about a small business. Saturday morning, I spent extra time getting ready for Grandma's party. Instead of my usual casual family gathering attire, I chose a burgundy wrap dress that struck the right balance between professional and celebratory. I wanted to look like someone who had important news to share, not someone who was trying too hard to impress. The party was being held at my parents' house, which had been decorated with photos spanning Grandma's 85 years. There were pictures of her as a young bride, as a mother raising 5 children, as a businesswoman who had run a successful catering company before retiring. It struck me that Grandma was actually an entrepreneur herself, though her generation didn't use that term for women who built small businesses. I arrived early to help with final preparations, and I could see that Mom was nervous about everything going perfectly. "Maria, can you help me arrange the photo displays? I want to make sure we have good examples from every decade of Grandma's life." As we worked together, I found myself looking at those photos with new eyes. Here was a woman who had built something meaningful with limited resources and societal constraints that made entrepreneurship much harder for women. She had created a business that supported her family and served her community, just like I was doing now, but with far fewer advantages. "Mom," I said as we arranged photos from the 1960s, when Grandma's catering business was at its peak, "did Grandma ever talk about what it was like to run her own business?" "Oh, constantly," Mom replied with a smile. "She was so proud of that catering company. She used to say it taught her that women could build anything they set their minds to, even when other people didn't think they were capable." The parallel wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to reveal my own business success at a celebration of a woman who had faced similar skepticism in her own time. By 3 p.m., the house was filled with 3 generations of Rodriguez family members. Grandma was holding court in the living room, accepting congratulations and sharing stories with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Uncle Robert was manning the bar, Jessica was helping coordinate the buffet, and various aunts and cousins were managing the complex logistics of a large family gathering. But I noticed something different in how Jessica interacted with me. Instead of the slightly condescending politeness she had shown at previous gatherings, she seemed genuinely excited to see me. When she handed me a glass of wine, she leaned in close. "Are you nervous?" she asked quietly. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly excited." "I can't wait to see everyone's faces," she said with a grin, "especially Dad's. He's been going on all week about how proud he is that I'm starting at Patterson and Associates." Before I could respond, my uncle's voice rose above the general conversation. "Attention, everyone. I think it's time for toasts to our birthday girl." This was it. The moment I had been building toward for months. As family members gathered around Grandma's chair, I positioned myself where I could address the whole room. My phone was in my hand, ready for the call I knew would come at exactly the right moment. The first few toasts were exactly what you'd expect. Heartfelt tributes to Grandma's role as the family matriarch, funny stories about her legendary stubbornness, grateful acknowledgments of the example she had set for all of us. When it was my turn, I stood up and looked around the room at faces that had known me my entire life. These were people who had watched me struggle through my 20s, who had worried about my career choices, who had sometimes doubted whether I would find my way to traditional success. "Grandma," I began, "you taught all of us that success isn't about what other people think. It's about building something meaningful and serving your community. You showed us that women can create their own opportunities, even when those opportunities don't exist yet." I paused, looking directly at Jessica, then at Uncle Robert, then at my parents. "I want to thank you for that example, because it gave me the courage to build something I'm very proud of." Right on cue, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, Jennifer Hayes, Rodriguez Retail Solutions, and smiled. "I'm sorry," I said to the room, "but I need to take this call. It's about work, and it's important." And then I put the phone on speaker, just as I had planned. The room fell silent as my phone's speaker came to life. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence, every glass paused halfway to someone's lips. Even the background music seemed to fade as my family found themselves involuntarily listening to what they assumed would be a brief work call. "Ms. Rodriguez," came Jennifer's crisp, professional voice through the speaker, "I have excellent news about the San Antonio expansion." I kept my expression neutral, as if this was just routine business. "Go ahead, Jennifer." "The final lease agreements for stores 5 and 6 have been executed. Both locations are confirmed, and we're looking at a coordinated grand opening in 6 weeks. Additionally, the Houston Investor Group has finalized their commitment. They're prepared to fund locations 7 through 12 across the Houston metro area." I watched my family's faces as the implications of what they were hearing began to register. Uncle Robert's beer glass had stopped moving entirely. My mother's eyes were widening with each word. Jessica was grinning like she was watching the best movie of her life. "That's wonderful news," I replied calmly. "What about the franchise development timeline?" "The legal team has completed the franchise disclosure documents. We're ready to begin accepting applications for franchise partners in Dallas, Oklahoma City, and New Orleans. Based on the interest we've already received, we could have 15 franchise locations operational within 18 months. Dad had set down his plate and was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between confusion and awe. Grandma, bless her, was smiling like she understood exactly what was happening even if she couldn't follow all the business details. "Excellent. And Jennifer, can you remind me of our current valuation projection?" "Based on our revenue growth and the expansion pipeline, the preliminary valuation from Morrison & Associates puts Local Roots Market at $12 million, with projections reaching $35 million within 3 years if we hit our franchise targets." The silence in the room was now complete. Even the children had stopped their background chatter, sensing that something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. "Perfect. Email me the franchise applications that came in this week, and let's schedule a call with the Morrison team for Tuesday morning. I want to review their franchise feasibility study before we make any commitments." "Will do. Oh, and congratulations again on the Chronicle article confirmation. Linda Thompson said it should run next Sunday as the cover story for their business innovations section." "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll talk to you Monday morning." I ended the call and looked around the room at 23 family members, who were staring at me like I had just announced I was moving to Mars. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Finally, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Maria," he said slowly, "did we just hear that you own a business worth $12 million? I smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction that I had waited 3 years to experience. "Actually, Robert, I own a business worth $12 million that's projected to be worth $35 million within 3 years. And yes, we're expanding to Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, and potentially 3 other states." "Local Roots Market," my mother said quietly, as if testing how the words sounded. What is Local Roots Market?" This was the moment I had been preparing for. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder containing promotional materials, financial summaries, and photos from all 4 of our current locations. Local Roots Market is a retail chain specializing in locally sourced products from small and regional producers. I began, handing the materials to Mom. "We currently operate 4 stores in the Austin area, with 2 more opening next month, and expansion planned across Texas and the South." Jessica couldn't contain herself any longer. "Show them the Cedar Park store," she burst out. "Mom, you have to see what she's built. It's incredible." But I held up a hand. I wanted to tell this story my way, without interruption. 3 years ago, when everyone was concerned about my career prospects at Walmart, I was actually using that experience to learn everything I could about retail operations. I spent my evenings building a consulting practice, focused on helping small food producers get their products to market. I pulled out my phone and showed them photos of our flagship Round Rock location. That consulting work taught me that there was a huge gap in the market. Small producers couldn't get shelf space in major grocery stores, and consumers who wanted locally sourced products had limited options beyond farmers markets. Dad had moved closer to get a better look at the photos. "This looks like a real grocery store," he said, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder. "It is a real grocery store. 4 real grocery stores, actually, with plans for 30 more. I showed them pictures of our product displays, our local makers' workshop, our supplier partnership walls. We've created a platform that helps small businesses scale while giving consumers access to products they can't find anywhere else." Miguel, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Wait, so when you said you were doing consulting work?" "I was running Rodriguez Retail Solutions, which became the foundation for Local Roots Market. The side project that everyone worried about was actually a business development strategy. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert's wife, looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem. But how did you afford to open grocery stores? I mean, that has to cost. We've raised $4 million in investment funding so far, with another $8 million committed for expansion. Our first store became profitable in 6 weeks. Our current monthly revenue across 4 locations is about $240,000. The numbers seem to hit different family members at different moments. I watched as various aunts and uncles did quick mental calculations, arriving at the realization that my dead-end retail career had produced a business generating nearly $3 million annually. Grandma, who had been listening to everything with the sharp attention that had made her such a successful businesswoman, suddenly started laughing. Not a small chuckle, but the kind of full-bodied laughter that comes from genuine delight. "Maria Elena Rodriguez," she said, using my full name in the way that usually meant I was in trouble. "You are exactly like me at your age." She gestured for me to come closer, and when I knelt beside her chair, she took my hands in hers. "When I started my catering business, people said I was crazy. Women didn't run businesses, they said. I should focus on being a good wife and mother. But I knew I could build something important." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I just never told them how big it was going to get until I was ready to prove it." The room erupted in a mix of laughter, congratulations, and rapid-fire questions. Cousins wanted to know if they could visit the stores. Aunts were asking about my suppliers. Uncles were inquiring about my business model and expansion strategy. But the reaction I was most interested in came from Uncle Robert. He approached me with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and admiration. "Maria, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I've spent the last 3 years thinking you weren't ambitious enough. I had no idea what you were actually building." "You don't need to apologize, Robert. You were looking at the information you had available. I just wasn't sharing the whole picture." "But why?" he asked. "If you were building something this impressive, why keep it secret?" It was a question several family members had asked in various forms, and I had been thinking about how to answer it honestly. "Because I was tired of having to defend my choices before I had results to show," I said. Every family gathering for 3 years included someone explaining why my career wasn't good enough or successful enough. I decided I'd rather prove what I was building than argue about it. Dad had joined our conversation, and I could see him processing everything he had learned in the last 20 minutes. "So when your mother and I were worried about your future, I was actually building a business that's now worth more than most people's retirement savings," I finished gently. "I know you meant well, but the assumptions about retail work being a dead-end career were based on traditional models that don't apply to entrepreneurship." Mom appeared at my elbow with tears in her eyes. "Maria, I'm so proud of you. But I'm also sorry that we made you feel like you couldn't share this with us." "You didn't make me feel that way," I clarified. "I chose not to share it because I wanted to focus on building the business, rather than managing other people's expectations about it." Jessica had been watching this entire exchange with obvious fascination. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When I was talking about moving up in your career, and you just sat there listening, I was sitting there thinking that I had already moved up beyond anything you were imagining for me. I replied with a smile. But I wasn't ready to explain that yet. The party continued for another 2 hours, but the dynamic had completely changed. Instead of the usual family gathering conversations about work and life plans, everyone wanted to hear details about local roots market. Cousins were asking if we needed part-time employees. Aunts were offering to spread the word about our stores. Uncle Robert was giving me business advice that was actually thoughtful and relevant. But the most meaningful conversation happened as people were starting to leave. Grandma pulled me aside for a private moment. "Mija," she said, "I want you to know that I understood what you were doing, even when the others didn't." "What do you mean?" "I've been watching you for 3 years, and I could see that you were building something. The way you talked about your work, the energy you had when you came to family gatherings. I knew you weren't just working a job, you were creating something important." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I knew you would tell us when you were ready. And because I remembered what it felt like to have people doubt what you're building. Sometimes the best thing family can do is trust that you know what you're doing, even when they can't see the whole picture." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically the day had changed my relationship with my family. For 3 years, I had felt like the family disappointment, the one who wasn't living up to her potential, who had chosen stability over ambition, who was stuck in a dead-end career. Now I was the family entrepreneur, the one who had built something impressive, who had taken calculated risks that paid off, who had created opportunities not just for herself, but for dozens of other small business owners. But more than the change in how they saw me, I was struck by how different I felt about myself. The woman who had hidden her business plans because she was afraid of family judgment was gone. In her place was someone who had built something meaningful and was excited to share it with people she cared about. Tomorrow, I would go back to the challenging but exhilarating work of scaling a rapidly growing business. I would deal with lease negotiations, supplier relationships, staffing challenges, and investor expectations. But tonight, I was just someone who had finally been able to show her family what 3 years of hard work and strategic thinking had created. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months after Grandma's birthday party, I was standing in the conference room of a downtown Dallas high-rise, looking out at a view that would have been unimaginable when I was stocking shelves at Walmart. Across the table sat 12 potential franchise partners, each representing a different market where local roots market could establish a presence. Behind me, a presentation screen displayed our expansion map, 37 planned locations across 5 states, representing what our financial advisors conservatively estimated as a $45 million enterprise. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened faster than anyone predicted. The Austin Chronicle article that Linda Thompson wrote had been picked up by 3 national business publications, leading to inquiries from potential investors, franchise partners, and media outlets across the country. Suddenly, local roots market wasn't just a successful regional concept. We were being positioned as a case study in innovative retail strategy. The demographic analysis for the Oklahoma City market shows exactly the kind of community engagement we've seen in our Texas locations, I was explaining to the group. Household income levels that support premium pricing for locally sourced products, plus a strong existing network of small food producers who are currently underserved by traditional retail channels. Margaret Chen, the venture capital partner who had become our lead investor for the franchise expansion, nodded approvingly. "Maria, can you walk us through the support structure you've developed for franchise partners?" I clicked to the next slide, which outlined our comprehensive training program, ongoing operational support, and marketing framework. Each franchise partner goes through a 6-week intensive training program at our Austin headquarters, followed by on-site support during their first month of operations. We've standardized everything from supplier vetting procedures to store layout optimization while maintaining flexibility for local market adaptation. The questions that followed were sophisticated and detailed, exactly the kind of discussion I had learned to navigate during my months of investor meetings. But what struck me most was how natural this felt now. A year ago, presenting to a room full of business executives would have been intimidating. Now it was simply part of my job as CEO of a rapidly scaling company. After the meeting, as I was gathering my materials, one of the potential franchise partners approached me. Janet Morrison owned a successful catering business in New Orleans and was interested in bringing local roots market to the Louisiana market. Maria, I have to ask, how did you develop the confidence to scale this concept so aggressively? Most retail entrepreneurs are much more conservative about expansion. It was a question I had been asked several times, and I had developed a standard answer about market research and financial projections. But something about Janet's genuine curiosity made me want to give her a more honest response. I think it came from understanding the difference between risk and uncertainty, I said. When I was working at Walmart, people saw that as a safe, low-risk career choice. But actually, I was facing the uncertainty of whether I would ever be able to build something meaningful. Scaling local roots market feels risky to some people, but for me, it's actually reducing uncertainty because I'm building toward a future I can control. Janet smiled. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes me want to partner with you. The drive back to Austin gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed since that conversation with Jessica at the Cedar Park store. The business metrics were impressive. We now had 7 company-owned locations generating $4.2 million in annual revenue, with franchise agreements signed for 15 additional stores across 4 states. But the personal transformation felt even more significant. The phone call I received as I pulled into my driveway perfectly illustrated how different things had become. It was my mother, and instead of the worried tone that had characterized most of our conversations over the past few years, she sounded excited. Maria, I just got off the phone with Mrs. Patterson from down the street. Her daughter lives in Houston, and she saw the article about local roots market in the Houston Business Journal. She wants to know if you're planning to open a store near her neighborhood. I laughed. Tell Mrs. Patterson that we're evaluating several Houston locations, but I can't share specific addresses until the lease agreements are finalized. I will. And Maria? I'm so proud of how professional you sound when you talk about business. You've really become, I don't know how to describe it. You've become the kind of person other people ask for advice. That observation meant more to me than any financial milestone or media coverage. For years, I had felt like the family member who needed guidance and correction. Now I was becoming someone people turn to for insights about business and career strategy. The shift was most apparent in my relationship with Jessica. What had started as a revelation about my hidden success had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared professional interests. She had taken a position at Patterson & Associates focusing on retail strategy consulting, and we had started meeting monthly to discuss industry trends and business challenges. Our most recent lunch conversation had been particularly meaningful. Jessica was working with a client who was struggling with exactly the kind of supply chain optimization issues I dealt with daily at local roots market. I keep thinking about what you said about learning business from the ground up, she told me over salads at a downtown restaurant. My MBA gave me great theoretical frameworks, but you understand how retail actually works in ways that I'm still learning. The theoretical frameworks are valuable too, I replied. You can analyze market trends and competitive positioning in ways that help me think strategically about expansion. We just learned different aspects of the same industry. Can I ask you something? She said. Do you ever regret the way things played out? I mean, keeping the business secret for so long? Dealing with all those family conversations where people were worried about your career? It was a question I had been thinking about myself. Honestly? No, I think I needed that time to build something substantial before sharing it. If I had announced my plans when I was still just developing the concept, I would have spent energy managing other people's expectations instead of focusing on execution. But wasn't it frustrating? Listening to people like Dad give you career advice when you were already building something bigger than anything he'd ever done. I considered that carefully. It was frustrating sometimes. But it also taught me that other people's opinions about your choices are usually based on incomplete information. Once I really understood that, their skepticism stopped affecting my confidence in what I was building. That conversation had stuck with me because it highlighted how much my relationship with external validation had changed. 3 years ago, family approval felt essential to my sense of success. Now, while I appreciated their support and excitement about local roots market, their opinions had become just one input among many in how I evaluated my progress and decisions. The real validation came from different sources now. It came from suppliers like Mrs. Chen, whose business had grown from farmers market sales to distribution across 7 retail locations. It came from customers who told me that local roots market had introduced them to products and producers they never would have discovered otherwise. It came from employees who were building careers in an industry they were passionate about rather than just working retail jobs. Most importantly, it came from the knowledge that I had built something that created value for multiple stakeholders: investors, employees, suppliers, customers, and communities. That kind of broad-based, positive impact felt more meaningful than any individual metric of success. The Austin Business Journal had recently named me to their 40 under 40 inches list, recognizing entrepreneurs who were making significant contributions to the local economy. The profile they published included a quote that I thought captured what I had learned about building a business. Success isn't about avoiding risk. It's about understanding which risks are worth taking and having the persistence to execute well when things get difficult. But perhaps the most satisfying moment of the entire journey had come just the week before, during a visit to our original Cedar Park location. I was walking through the store, checking on new product displays and talking with staff, when I overheard a conversation between two customers. "This place is amazing," one woman was saying to her friend. "I've discovered 3 new local brands just in the past month, and the quality is so much better than what you find in regular grocery stores." "I know," her friend replied. "My sister lives in Dallas, and she's been asking when they're going to open one there. Apparently there's nothing like this in her area." Standing there listening to customers organically recommend local roots market to their friends in other cities, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenue numbers or expansion plans. We had created something that people genuinely valued, something that enhanced their lives in small but meaningful ways. That evening, as I reviewed financial projections for our next board meeting, I found myself thinking about that conversation with Dr. Patricia Williams when I was trying to decide whether to accept Jonathan's initial expansion offer. She had asked me what my 5-year vision was, and I had talked about regional presence and 12 locations. Now, less than 2 years later, we were tracking toward 47 locations across 5 states, with preliminary discussions about expansion into the Southeast and Mountain West regions. We had grown from a single store concept into what industry analysts were calling a, quote, new category of retail that was influencing how larger chains thought about local sourcing and community engagement. But more than the business growth, I was proud of how the success had affected my sense of identity and purpose. I was no longer the person who felt like she had to prove her worth to family members who didn't understand her choices. I had become someone who created opportunities for others while building something meaningful for herself. The little girl who had been told that success meant following a predetermined path, college, professional job, traditional career progression, had discovered that sometimes the most fulfilling path is the one you create yourself. The woman who had been dismissed as having a dead-end retail job had built a retail empire that was changing how people thought about local commerce and community engagement. As I closed my laptop and prepared for another day of running a company I had built from scratch, I smiled thinking about that conversation at Jessica's graduation party when Uncle Robert had said I was stuck at ground level forever. Sometimes ground level is exactly where you need to start when you're planning to build something that reaches the sky. And sometimes the people who doubt your vision are the ones who get the biggest surprise when you prove that your version of success was bigger than anything they imagined possible. 3 years after walking away from my last shift at Walmart, I had built something that no one, including me, had seen coming. But more importantly, I had discovered that the most powerful kind of revenge isn't proving other people wrong. Twenasa. It's proving yourself right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.